Hi, this is Lee Jasper Drive Time. We're doing a stop and search special, and we're at the home of Reuben Smith Anglin, a 19-year-old boy who, university student, had a horrendous experience of stop and search by the Metropolitan Police Service, and he's going to be telling us all about what happened to him and how he felt about it. We're also interviewing his dad, an experienced former Metropolitan Police officer, as well as his auntie, who is a detective sergeant in the Metropolitan Police Service. You're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time, and this is our Stop and Search special.
Hi, my name's Lee Jasper. This is Brixton, London, and you're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time.
Hi Ruben, welcome to Lee Jasper Drive Time, and thanks very much for doing this interview. Now Ruben, you were subject to what appears to be a very aggressive stop and search by the Metropolitan Police. First of all, tell us how old you are.
I'm 19 years old.
And you're currently doing what?
I'm studying sports science at Portsmouth University.
How long have you been there?
Just been there for a year, going into my second year in September.
And you've been stopped and searched by the police. It's on a video that seems viral. You've done some other news items that we've seen on mainstream news. Tell us a little bit about when it happened and what happened.
So it happened Monday the 20th around 10 past 2 p.m. broad day.
The 20th of July.
20th of July.
Okay.
I was just walking down to the park, just on the phone to a friend of mine. Just saw a police car just drive past. 4 police officers were just staring at me the entire time. And I said to my friend that I feel like I'm going to get searched. So I feel like I'm going to get stopped. The car just spun around and came back. 4 officers jumped out, and before I knew it, I just had cuffs on my wrists and I was just being shouted at.
So they jumped out the car?
Yeah.
What was their demeanour? What was their...
They were just like, stop there, stop there, stop there. And they just put handcuffs on my wrists, and as soon as they'd done that, then they started to kind of calm down a bit more and then talk to me as if I were human.
So did they give you any indication of why they stopped you when they jumped out the car?
No. It was only until I had handcuffs on me was then I was told I was being stopped for a drug search. So 2 of them one came from behind me, one came from almost parallel to me as I was walking on the right side of the road, and one of them came from almost in front of me.
Okay.
So it was felt really claustrophobic, couldn't really go anywhere, couldn't really breathe essentially without turning and seeing a police face.
What did you think was happening?
It was frightening. You just don't expect to just walk down the street and have police officers just jump out at you. Even though I hadn't done anything wrong, the way they were treating me, I felt as if I had done something wrong. And that's probably a feeling that a lot of black kids around the UK and especially London probably feel as well.
Having been stopped, you're told that it's a drug search.
Yeah.
So what gave them the reasonable suspicion that you might have drugs?
I can only speculate myself as I was just walking along. I wasn't dressed in any suspicious manner. I was just how I am now. Joggers and a t-shirt, just walking along with my headphones and just minding my business really. So
you weren't smoking, you don't smoke?
Don't smoke at all. I'm an athlete, I play football.
There you go. So you're an athlete, you're studying at university, you weren't smoking at the time, you don't smoke at all, you've never been in trouble with the police?
Never ever.
So there's really no reason for them to suspect you of anything.
Yeah.
They could have just spoken to you.
Yeah.
But they put these handcuffs on you. Were you being a threat to them? Were you gesticulating? Were you angry? Why were you cuffed?
I can't tell you as to why I was cuffed, but my dad has always taught me how to kind of deal with this type of situations. Even if I'm being treated unfairly, he said to always be polite, always be respectful, but always know your rights. So what happened was that I gave the police officers the necessary information they needed, but everything else I didn't feel as if I needed to answer. It was just simply a no comment, or I just stayed silent. I wasn't gesticulating, I wasn't being aggressive with my voice or actions. I kept a level tone. I even asked why they put handcuffs on me. I said, I'm being completely compliant. You don't need to put handcuffs on me. And they just said that it's for my safety and for theirs, as if I was being treated as a criminal already.
Your father is a former Metropolitan Police officer, and we're going to speak to him later. And it seems to me that he'd given you good training in relation to how to respond in that situation. Despite that training, how were you feeling at the time when this was taking place?
I felt as if I still wanted to give a reaction. When you're scared and you're frightened, that feelings quickly turn to anger. And it's a thing where I can only imagine how many other black children, black boys especially, who didn't have someone as a father figure to kind of teach them how to deal with those type of situations. So when they're scared and they act hostile, they just get even more trouble, you know?
And when they put the handcuffs on, they didn't just leave them hanging loosely around your wrist, did they? You were ratcheted up in the handcuffs, I believe.
Yeah, you could say that. My arms were sore for a few hours, to say the least. I took video evidence as soon as it happened, just passed along to Dad. The handcuffs weren't even on my wrists, they were more up my arm. And the way the police officer was holding my arms behind my back, it was a bit of a, I couldn't afford to relax a little bit, or was a possibility I could break my wrist or even my arm.
And what did they, so they've then searched you, they've gone through all your pockets.
Yeah.
This is in broad daylight now, so
Yeah.
all your neighbours or everybody's passing by is seeing. How are you feeling at this stage when they're searching you?
Felt violated. No one should be able to just go through whatever you're wearing without any reasonable grounds or reasonable suspicion. I didn't have anything on me. They took out my driving license, asked questions about that, asked if I bought my phone, asked if I bought my AirPods, and I feel like police officers don't really have the right to ask those questions.
So principally they were looking for drugs, but when they didn't find any,
They started looking for any problem they can.
so essentially a fishing trip to see if there's anything else
Yeah.
that they could possibly justify this stop. So what powers were you stopped under?
I was stopped under powers section 23 and section 60.
On the pace?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So they must have reasonable suspicion. So did they give you an explanation as to why they had stopped you?
No, I wasn't given anything.
Did they give you a slip?
I wasn't
Stop
given
and
a
search
slip. No,
Did they offer you a slip?
no.
So you weren't given any opportunity to get in the stop and search monitoring slip by these officers?
No, I wasn't. I didn't even know that I was supposed to get a slip until I spoke to Dad about it. They just hadn't simply mentioned it at all.
So all this had happened. You're now in handcuffs. They've now rifled through your pockets. They've asked you lots of questions about your earpods and your driving license and your phone. What happens next?
The last thing they done is take the cuffs off me. Even throughout that, I was still compliant. When they took the cuffs off me, I wished them a good day, went about my business, and it was only then where they were a bit just like, okay, you can go. But they almost said that as if, regrettably, as if, oh, we have to let this one go because he didn't have anything, we don't have a reason to. But yeah, just always stayed respectful, always stayed compliant, regardless of the circumstances.
And during that, since that time, since you had that stop and search, what's been your reflection since? How's it left you feeling?
It's been more of a, regardless of whether you do right or wrong in a society, as a black man, you still get treated the same.
Right.
You get treated as a criminal, and it's almost as if the roles are reversed, where I have to prove I'm innocent instead of innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
And no one should really be subjected to that. No one should have to do that.
And what's been the response of your family and friends and people who've seen you on there? Have they?
I have a lot of supportive family members.
Uh-huh.
A lot of them reached out to me and offered me support. I have a lot of friends that offered me support, but it's more of who my family were. Because if my family weren't who they were, then this wouldn't be getting half as much attention as it had already.
And tell us who your family are.
My dad's a former Met police officer, and my auntie Janet is high up in that department too. So everyone kind of knows their stuff when it comes to this type of thing.
In fact, your auntie is chair of the Metropolitan Black Police Officers Association.
Yeah.
And your dad's a bit of a TV superstar.
He's got a big ego. I don't really like admitting it.
I know where you get yours from, looking at this movie. Well, look, thanks for giving us time for the interview. What would be your message? Because at the minute, you'll have seen, as many of us have seen, lots of viral videos of young black men being stopped and searched by the police. Your encounter, you were able to remain calm, you were able to process. What would your advice be to young people who are subject to these, what appear to be discriminatory racial profiling stop and searches?
You just have to remain calm.
Yeah.
Because if you react in any hostile way, that gives the police officers another 99 reasons to take you to the station, long out your day, and this is that. It's better that you stay calm, record evidence, be polite, be respectful, know your rights, and just, it's the only way we can do it, because we can't stop ourselves from being searched, but we can control how we react to those type of situations.
Good advice. And what would your message be to the Metropolitan Police Service and those officers who racially profiled you on that day?
This hasn't been the first time I've been subjected to this, and I'm sure it won't be the last, not for a very long time. This has been an ongoing issue. It's not a new issue, it's an old one. People have known about this, but there comes a stage where you know of the issue, but now you're just taking a deliberate choice not to act upon it and rectify it.
So what would your message be to the Metropolitan Police Service?
Just got to fix up. You just got to come correct, implement new protocols, work with the community instead of working against us, and I'm sure we'll cooperate.
Dara, thanks for doing Lee Jasper Drive Time special. Well, we've interviewed your son, Ruben. I must say, he's a credit to you, his family and the wider community. I think everybody would agree. He's a wonderfully confident, emotionally intelligent young man. So well done, being his father. What was your response to when Ruben told you what had actually happened to him?
Well, I wanted to be clear about what he was actually saying to me, and obviously I went through the normal things. Did they say who they were? Did they speak to you before handcuffing you? Did they give you a reason for the stop? Did they tell you why they were stopping you? Did they give you a stop slip when they were finished? And most importantly, did you know who they were? He didn't know who they were, because clearly he was shocked, frightened, and he had the sense of mind to video his marks on his wrist. Well, if they were on their wrist, it wouldn't be so bad, but they're up the arm, and that's potentially quite dangerous, because there's no flexibility with handcuffs if they're up the arm.
You're a former Metropolitan Police officer. How long were you in the service?
I did 22 years.
Okay, so you would be aware of what the process, the procedure, the regulations in relation to handcuffing somebody, the powers in terms of reasonable suspicion.
Yes.
Talking to your son Ruben, it was clear that there was no reasonable suspicion that we can discern, and neither was he informed of any reasonable grounds for his stop. What do you make of that?
In this day and age, I'm actually gobsmacked. I've been in the job 22 years, and we seem to be taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and that by itself is shocking. And I let it lie when he told me on that Monday. I just wanted the dust to settle and see how he felt a couple of days later. So on the Wednesday when I spoke to him, he was still quite aggrieved about what happened. And I said, well, okay, I'll put the complaint in. It's symptomatic of how they are policing London. And London is pretty much 50% non-white. And if that's how they're going to do it, then there's going to be issues and there's going to be problems.
So in your reasonable opinion, in your professional opinion, as somebody with long-standing service in the Metropolitan Police Service, did they have reasonable suspicion to stop your son?
None whatsoever. You couldn't even make it up unless you're going to say it's jaywalking, and we don't have that offence over here. So, no, there is no reason unless walking down the street, minding your own business with your headphones in, on the phone, is offence. It's an offence. Now, that's where it starts, and unfortunately, we tend to be a little bit emotional sometimes, particularly when we haven't done anything wrong. And I believe they rely on that reaction to find a reason to arrest you, whether it be for obstruction or for a drug search at the station or whatever it may be. And we start to give them those grounds once we start to overreact. But as far as I'm concerned, if it starts badly, then the whole thing's bad and the whole thing's wrong.
What we used to call it back in the day is we used to get arrested for failing the attitude test, which is not giving due deference to the uniform and the Queen's badge. And you know, sometimes when we used to articulate our rights, that used to get us in more trouble.
Oh, absolutely.
And so on.
Yeah.
You taught your son clearly well in terms of his whole demeanour and manner of remaining calm, and that stood him in good stead on this occasion. Lots of young black people don't have that kind, as Ruben pointed out, don't have that kind of example, role model, leadership of a father providing with that. And you're right, to a certain extent, the police recognise that. And so the policing is almost provocative, would you say that?
It's extremely provocative. It's, I mean, the test is, what would a normal person think walking down the road? The test is, if you were one of the privileged people of this country and your son or daughter left the house to walk down the road, how would they feel? And a lot of people sort of they just don't believe it happens, you know, until they see it. And there comes a point when you can only turn the other cheek for so long, because in doing so, it's almost like we're giving them permission to continue. And when you run out of cheeks, then what you've got to do? You've got to make a mark in the sand, and someone has to take accountability and responsibility for this, and that's the Commissioner.
Commissioner Cressida Dick. There's lots of controversy around this commissioner at the moment. What's your view? Is he somebody who is showing the right degree of leadership and professionalism for the Metropolitan Police Service?
Personally, I think that she's just there not to rock the boat. I think she's compliant. I think she'll do whatever the government tells her to do with little or no voice. And she just gets on and do it. And I think the government was just looking for a safe pair of hands. There were lots of other, I suppose, suitable chief constables that would do things a little different, I suspect. But that's the way it is. It's a political appointment, and I don't see what good she's doing for London.
What is your view of the current state of relationships between the police and the black communities, particularly the Afro-Caribbean community, which we represent in London? What's your sense of that relationship?
Well, they've set relationship with the community back a whole generation. If you take my son, for example, he's going through this now, and he's going to have a family of his own, hopefully one day. And we have to look to those children now and stop the early decriminalisation and of what's coming on with the community. The community are over 80, but we are compliant people. You're going to get bad apples in any society, but intelligence-led policing, if they were using it, would probably be a little bit more justifiable. There's nothing justifiable about what they're doing. There's nothing justifiable in terms of intelligence-led policing going on in London. If you're black, you're going to get stopped. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're going to get stopped. If you're in the right place at the right time, you're going to get stopped. In fact, you can't do right for doing wrong. And when we react, they criminalise you. And the system's against us. That's disproportionate in its sentencing, in the way they handle us, because they don't understand. They believe everything that comes out of the police's mouths unless you bring evidence.
Now, you compared Section 60 to the sus laws of the past, and you and I are both of an age where you can remember being arrested on suspicion of committing a crime to persons or property unknown, with the specific charge under the, I think, 1826 Vagrancy Act.
1824,
1824. So, do you really believe that Section 60 is equivalent to the old sus law?
Well, absolutely. If Section 60, violent disorder, weapons.
Just to be clear for the viewers, Section 60 is a power to
stop anybody when the commissioner's given power. It comes from the commissioner or commander or DAC. who gives the authority for Section 60 to be implemented in a particular area where there are offences of violent disorder, weapons, etc., etc., etc. But it's specific. In relation to that, unless they can show where Reuben was, that there's been a history of stabbings or this or that, or violence or of that ilk, then it doesn't apply. If you're going to go for a Section 23, which is the search under the Misuse of Drugs Act, 71, then you have to have reasonable grounds. And you formulate those grounds by actually trying to engage someone and speaking with them. You don't just jump out and rush someone. You don't identify yourself. He knows he's just starting to live his life. He's had no dealings with the police. He's never been in trouble. And the majority of the kids that they're criminalising or attempting to are of that ilk. Is it any wonder there's a dim view from the generation coming up, our kids' generation, against the police?
And what would your message be to Commissioner Cressida Dick and the Metropolitan Police Service, given your experience?
Well, I know they don't like to take racism. You know, they don't accept it. So if they did, they would behave differently. As a consequence of that, it goes above their heads, and we have to look for things specific. In my son's case, well, he's been assaulted, right? And technically speaking, the officer themselves should be disciplined or arrested for an offence of assault because he's gone beyond his duty. What she needs to be doing is we keep saying lessons will be learned and courses and this and that. Well, actually, why don't they switch it on its head and go to the people of London and say to them, how would you like us to police you? What are your issues? Help us to help you. Instead of doing it from an enforceable point of view, where they don't listen. They say they do, but they don't. The DAC will be out there saying what they say, the Commissioner will be, and all those high-ranking officers, but they're not on the street. So by the time they send their message from the top down, that's been filtered down. It bears very little resemblance to it, and the people that have to implement that, the sergeants and inspectors, have to believe in it to implement it.
She denied that the Metropolitan Police is an institutionally racist organisation. She was in the press, Cressida Dick, recently saying that. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Is she calling Scarman a liar then? Lord Scarman?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
is he-
talking about Lord Macpherson.
McPherson, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, is he a liar then?
Right,
You know, if
I think to be fair, she said she would say that they've moved on.
well, how?
Yeah.
Where? You know, right now things are reminiscent of what happened in the 70s when I was growing up. As far as I see it, if they could be honest and say we messed up, we're sorry. You know, people might not forgive them so easily, but they accept you've taken it on the chin. We put our hands up and we're sorry, but they obstruct and they fight and they defend to the very last until you have the evidence. And then, how many officers have ever been disciplined for racism? How many have ever been disciplined for the deaths in police custody that occur? How many of them gone to court? I mean,
I think less than 1%
less than
of all complaints are actually lead to any sort of action in relation to race complaints within the Met.
Well, all these people can't be wrong, can they? They all can't be wrong.
Absolutely.
And when faced with that, then what are you doing about it?
Yeah.
And particularly in Black Lives Matter now, you know, you'd have thought you'd been focused a little bit more. But the way I see things, whether it's the COVID virus act, it's all a form of control deemed to sort of demonise the communities, particularly those that aren't privileged. And by that I mean if you're not white, you've got a problem.
Janet Hills, you're 29 years a serving Metropolitan Police officer, a detective sergeant no less. You're currently chair of the Metropolitan Black Police Officers Association.
Correct.
And Ruben is your nephew.
He is, yes.
Indeed. A credit to you and his father and his mother and their family he is too.
Yes.
Having already interviewed him and having heard his personal testimony yourself, what are your reflections on what happened to him?
You know, when I first got to hear that he'd been stopped, I was angry, actually. I was frustrated about it because, you know, the video that I'd been sent, showed that he had handcuff marks on his wrist, which kind of meant to me that he had been stopped and nothing found, but they'd felt the need to handcuff him to establish that he wasn't carrying anything on him. So, you know, when I heard that, I was really, really sort of frustrated about it.
Many people will say that lots of young black boys getting stopped and searched all over the capital in disproportionate numbers. Is this something you've been raising as your capacity as chair of the Metropolitan Police Officers Association?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I advocate for, you know, in terms of communities, black communities in particular, that are subjected to disproportionate amounts of stop and search, and how we can improve upon that. You know, we provide scrutiny internally around the numbers, and especially during the lockdown, I was challenging the organisation around why the numbers were particularly high, based on the fact that most people were in their homes and under some sort of restriction, government restriction. So to have the numbers higher than they were this time last year was just unbelievable, and to again demonstrate the fact that it was disproportionate for young black men being stopped.
We saw that the increase had been some 22,000 stops and search between March and June of this year, a huge increase right across the capital. And you're right, it was in the context of lockdown with lots fewer people on the street. How are they justifying that kind of ramping up of stop and search with so very few in number and a huge drop in the rate of violence as another backdrop?
Again, they put it down to the fact that they were targeting offenders in terms of, you know, violent crime and other criminal activity. However, for me, when you've got an outcome rate of 20% in terms of that number, it means 80%.
20% arrest rate?
No, outcome rate from your stop. So
Okay.
you're finding something,
right,
or there's some offence there. And then you've got 80% of people that are being stopped, that nothing's being found. Then actually, that to me is not an effective way to use the stop and search power.
Has stop and search got to be reformed?
I think it probably does need to be reformed, but only in so much that the practice and the way it's delivered needs to be reformed.
Yeah.
So it does need to be intelligence-led, so that we have good intelligence on stopping people. There needs to be engagement as well in terms of the power, because, you know, you are not taking someone's liberty away. You are basically searching them on suspicion that they may have something on them that they're not allowed to have. So in terms of building that intelligence, sometimes having the conversation will help. And in terms of trying to solve crime, definitely having a conversation would help that, you know, for us to solve crimes. Because, you know, those very people that we are, you know, turning over in terms of stop and search are the very people that will be the witnesses and victims of crime.
And you talked about community engagement there, an incredibly important part, and any good officer with good street craft is going to engage in conversation, because it's a way of ruling out and ruling in people of suspicion. But in terms of community engagement, what's your view on the state of relations currently, particularly around the African and Caribbean communities and the Metropolitan Police Services in London?
So I think it's really tense at the moment. After the death of George Floyd in America, which has had ramifications here in the UK, this has obviously flagged up issues which have been here for years in terms of community and race relations between the police and community, that requires a greater reflection internally, because it's almost like policing has had its head in the sand in terms of the societal changes that we've seen over the years, where, you know, there's a lot of denial in terms of the systemic racism that we know exists within society and therefore must exist within policing. And that denial doesn't allow us to police as effectively as we could do, because we're not acknowledging, we're not owning the problem, and therefore we're not going to be able to put an effective action plan in place to deal with the problem. So I would say that community race relations at the moment is tense, and that we need to do more effective engagement with our communities and with officers, black officers and Asian officers internally, and staff, to be fair, internally, around what the issues are and how best we can deal with them.
Well, thanks for watching this interview and staying with us. I think you will agree with me that this whole family is a credit to London as a whole, and young Ruben a credit both to his family and the wider community. The messages and the implications are profound. Why is it the Metropolitan Police Service are approaching all black people as if they are potentially superhuman criminals? It's a disproportionate use of force. It's a disproportionate use of Section 60, which has been described by the father of Ruben as the new sus law. You've heard from him, his auntie, and me, that this racism of the Metropolitan Police Service has got to stop. That's all for tonight, but we want you to stay safe during the COVID period. We do know that second surge is on its way, so don't be believing the government advice. Make sure you keep you and yours safe. See you next time on Lee Jasper Drive Time.